Thank you very much for staying with us on Decision 2023 on TVC News. On Saturday, 25th of February, Nigerians headed to the polls to vote a new president. Well, that process spiraled into Sunday because voting continued in some polling units in the country. At the National Collation Centre in Abuja, where the eventual winner of this election would be announced. Well, now it has been postponed to reconvene at 11 a.m. tomorrow. So 11 in the morning tomorrow, INEC and other officials would be gathered there for continuation of the announcement or result. But so far, Ekiti State result from there has been announced. And in that result breakdown, we have the All Progressives Congress polling 201,494 votes. The Labour Party polled 11,397 votes. The New Nigeria People's Party polled 264 votes, while the PDP polled 89,554 votes. So far, Ekiti State results from there has been announced. So we are still awaiting results from 35 states and the Federal Capital Territory. It's not clear just yet when this whole process would be over and the president-elect would be announced. But all fingers are crossed and all eyes are on INEC as they continue the process. In the studio with me this evening, as we continue the conversation, I have joining me Dr. Jide Ologun. He's a lawyer and a public affairs analyst. Good evening, and thank you for joining us in the studio today.
It's my pleasure. Good evening.
All right, and I also have here Olanrewaju Siraj. He's chairman, Header Resource. Thanks for joining us this evening.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Indeed, it's been like 48 hours now, non-stop, watching to see how the election process turns out. On a general note, what is your assessment of the process so far? Let me begin with you, Olanrewaju.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think it's been the case of a very good, commendable mileage in terms of the display by quite a number of the voters. And the same thing goes to the law enforcement agencies. We've seen the performances to the extent at which efforts were made to reduce the real breakdown of law and order in terms of those who would want to disrupt the process, either where they think they have lower strength in terms of voting followers, and those who would also want to go to the extent of preventing others where they think they have maximum strength. Do you have pockets of those instances where there were disruptions across the country? I mean, that's why you're having the election also conducted today in Bayelsa State, and that would be done in some other states, including some parts of Lagos where the election could not hold on Saturday. And we've seen, the little challenges that you can see with the commencement of the process. And I would want to say that it's important for both the citizens and the politicians. The politicians have really not done very well. There's some, just amongst all the stakeholders within the electoral process, I think the politicians are the least in terms of compliance with the expectations and also the rule of engagement, because there's been some very incisive statements that are coming from some of the politicians, and I was expecting more of statesman-like statements, from quite a number of them, to the extent where attention will have to be doused, to the extent that you don't have to actually burn down the country with your aspiration or your assumption of what you think are shortcomings or your suspicion of what you want to talk about, compromise of the process. And that we're not really up to that stage yet. So it is very critical to see going forward how the politicians are going to conduct themselves. There are channels for, redress that can be approached by the politicians where they think so. And as you would want to see with the declaration of result and that of the INEC portal, every party has at least an agent at the polling unit. So even without INEC announcing, you have the results with you. So all that is required is also wait for INEC to do the announcement, and then you can cross-check that with what you have, juxtapose if there's going to be differences, and then you hear your grievances. It is not sufficient to start this whole level of the crisis that are almost being precipitated. And unfortunately, I've heard that quite a number from analysts with the challenges in terms of the logistics in Lagos State. Without making an excuse for Lagos, I would say it was expected. For the practical point of view of my experience observing election in this country since 1999, observing election in several, at least all the West African states, countries in West Africa, the logistic for movement of electoral materials is not a child's play. If some people can afford to go to court, get an injunction restraining INEC to use the usual traditional movement of electoral materials, which is working with the NURTW and the public transportation system to move the materials. And that injunction restrain INEC from procuring their services. It can only be expected that there will be that change. And that happened almost like the eve of the election. So it ended up that some of us, for me, who was an observer, my car became the logistic movement for many of, because as at 12 o'clock, they were still stranded at the distribution center, not being able to move to the polling unit. So I ended up moving them back and forth to the polling unit. So we really need to be practical and dynamic, in some of the things that we do in the electoral process, and also be very focused enough to possibly second guess what are the likely impact of actions and statements that will be made during the process.
That's what it said, being practically dynamic. Perhaps technology, would be one of the things that could help. And the BVAS was introduced into this system and is believed that it is the way to go. It would help the electoral process. It would help prevent issues of ballot box snatching. But in this particular election, just like the result coming in from Ekiti State, we understand that obviously there was the issue of overvoting, and the BVAS was actually bypassed. So let's talk about the use of technology in this election, Jide. How well have we fared as a country? Before now, it was the issue of the card reader. Now there is BVAS. But apparently, it's looking like the BVAS itself can also be tweaked in some way.
Predominantly, the BVAS assisted to a large extent, though we had some complaints. And that is the positioning of infrastructure with superstructure. Superstructure is the human element that we manage the BVAS, and in some cases where some talks came to snatch the BVAS. And in some occasions, the BVAS were replaced. And for the BVAS, you don't need internet services. But for the transmission of results, you need internet services, because we discussed it earlier today. And that is also calling for INEC and the federal government to upscale the available infrastructure to back the technology you are deploying for your electoral processes. Because when you talk about good governance, how you onboard leaders is critical to enjoying good governance. And globally speaking, your election is supposed to be, free, fair, and credible. And the world is watching. And then by and large, the elections were quite peaceful in some parts of the country, but volatile in other parts of the country. And I must also commend the fresh awareness of the electorates. Quite a number of them came out keen on exercising the franchise of electing leaders. Like Abraham Lincoln, a one-time American president, said, that the ballot is stronger than the bullet. So we must also touch on that. And again, talking about the security agents that assisted INEC in ensuring that elections held, as against the uproar of their invading the space before the elections, my encounters with them, very, civil, because I also served as an observer, moving from one location to the other, and of course, in the media engagements. And for Nigerians, so many of them trekking to where they will vote. I even saw a physically challenged person whose picture I saw later, who went all the way to vote. So, and participation is one of the key elements in democracy. So I think in the area of apathy, we have been lifted a bit. And talking about the beavers deployment, this is the first time that beavers will be engaged during general elections. There had been moments when we engaged them, the Edo election, the Osun State election. And the INEC carried out a mock trial of these facilities in Abuja and some metropolitan areas. So we have advised that you also need to consider the local areas too. So it's about facilities, having the infrastructure, and training those who will handle these materials effectively. And on the case of logistics, we understand that in Lagos State, for instance, some of the ad hoc staff that should support developed cold feet on the morning of the election, and there had to be a quick intervention to bridge that gap. And that may be connected to the threat of insecurity. Recall that in the eastern part of the country, some of them withdrew due to insecurity. So we need to balance all these and going forward, learn from what is on ground. And the delays in bringing materials to polling units is also part of what is now affecting the collation of the results, because some had to vote late into the evening. Some could not even vote at all. We received phone calls from some. Even though they waited, they were, zealous about voting, but materials could not get to them. And he has addressed the issue of the court decision. It also touched me that about less than 24 hours to the general elections, a perpetual injunction was granted against INEC. And I think, by and large, putting INEC on the scale of delivering on a project, INEC had to swim against the storm to ensure these elections held. Because towards the elections, many did not even believe it was going to be possible. We had the issue of the fuel scarcity. Indeed. We had the issue of cash crunch, different kinds of issues that appeared to be threatening the elections. But here we are now. We are on the other side of the elections and talking about results. And I just want to cancel that INEC is the only umpire mandated under the Nigerian Constitution to announce results of elections officially. So please don't heat up your blood by online narratives and trajectories that are flying around. You expect that the campaigns are over, the projections are over. Now we are confronted with reality. So let's just patiently wait. Like they say that the groom that you are bringing the bride to should not be in a rush, because eventually you have to live for many years with that bride.
Well, I think that point can't be overemphasized, really, telling people and reminding them that indeed only INEC has the statutory powers to announce results. So whatever one has been seeing on social media, peddled by whoever or whatever organization, can more or less be considered as, is it fake news now?
Well, it can be misinformation. It can actually be valid sometimes, but it can't be taken as the official announcement. I mean, announcements are made sometimes, they're usually made at the polling unit. So you hear it and you have copies of the results, like we said, but it is important that you allow the official announcement. Some of the political parties, I can say, to a large extent, would have even the comprehensive results, especially those with agents in all the polling units, because they also have their situation rooms, they have their incident room and the rest of that. So they must be computing already. So you will see quite a number of them who by now are very much aware they have either lost the election. And for them to cover up for the losses, claim the issue of rigging and also coming up with all kinds of permutation and the rest of that. And the ones that possibly are quiet or even in celebrating mood might also have seen from the results, from their agents, in all the polling units, how they're faring in the total score. So it is very much important. And this also goes to the media, and that will be part of the work that I would expect that post-election, we have failed to do that 2011, 2015, 2019. And that is why we're having this level of sharp divide when it comes to the campaign and becomes very toxic. It is moving gradually from the adults to the young people that are now also being part of the electoral process. The campaign is just about abuse, it's about whatever form of attack, especially on the social media. And that was why the whole world was almost assuming there wasn't going to be election come February 25th, because the whole thing that you see outside there is almost the word about threat, about the blowing up of the system, and almost about the challenge that election might not actually go free and fair. And good enough, we've seen that it's possible to have as much of anywhere in the world is likely to be skirmishes during election. It is almost like a context. Even some people will do it without the knowledge of some of the politicians and candidates. Some takes it as far as even they don't need permission from you to carry out some of the actions. And it is important to see how we want to rebuild immediately after election. The politicians must be able to speak to their followers and say, this is not a war that you're fighting. This is a context, and this is also supposed to be a conflict that you must resolve after you have this level of resolution or decision taking, after you must have competed with each other. And that is very important. We have seen where we've graduated from religious divide for the campaign to ethnic divide in the campaign. And post the campaign and the election, we need to come back to the country that we want to be. It is very important. And this can only be done by politicians. Unfortunately, politicians have taken advantage of it to try and sell their ambition. And that is why you will really see, go back and play the tapes. Many of the politicians didn't campaign on the basis of issues or any form of ideology.
But they had manifestos.
Go and ask, I can assure you, majority of them can't speak to their manifestos when they are just talking to you, and it is extremely sad. That's why I said, ask many of their supporters even about the manifesto or program of their candidate. They can't speak to them because that was not the basis for which they are supporting candidates. It is not about programs of the candidate. It's not about the program of the political party, and that's why here it becomes very easy for the fluidity that you see in crisscrossing from one political party to the other to happen. And you can see a candidate contest, and in this election cycle in one party, the next election cycle in another party, in the next election cycle in the third party. I mean, these are parties that are totally at variance with one another, but because it is not on the basis of ideology or understanding or program of action of the party that they try to contest or accept to power, but it's just about the quest for power, and the party is just used as a vehicle to access power. Once they get into office, go across all the governors and many of the presidents and check how much of their programs tallied with the manifesto that were marketed during contest. Go and check how many of them still even implement what is in their manifesto. You will be shocked that you can't find any correlation between those manifestos and programs of the elected officials.
So you think this is as a result of lack of party ideology?
Precisely. Our politicians have you can't have ideology. It is extremely almost impossible for you in some of, not necessarily going to the global north and the western country, that it's going to be extremely difficult for you to cross from, Labour Party to Conservative, and then you go and contest election, you're likely never going to win because people can just see where you're coming from and the contradiction that is associated with that aspiration. And you can't see from Democrats to just Republican. You can move and become an independent candidate because of the issues with them. It's not going to be very easy for you to move. But here, you can be one in the morning and you'll be another one in the evening. And you go to some of even other neighboring countries in Africa here. It is extremely difficult. People can move out from one party, form an entirely new party that would be like an offshoot of the party where you're coming from based on some of the ideological differences that would happen in the parties where you're living from. But it is not where you move from the competing parties like we have in Nigeria. I mean, that is why Nigeria is actually a case study anytime for the world to really understand. And it could be very difficult when it defies all logics that you can assume.
Well, as it is, we have observers from across the world who are participating in this process. They are there at the polling units. You have them now at the collation centers, watching the process. And at the end of it, we expect reports from them on what they observed. And of course, whatever lessons can be learned from the process. You mentioned something about, how the president comes in and what eventually the president does while in office. We know that by May 29th, we'll have a new president sworn in Nigeria. And then one would wonder what really should be the task before this new president, because there seems to be a myriad of issues that need to be attended to. What should be the priority, Jide?
The grand norm already established direction for governance. If you look at section 14, subsection 2 of the Nigerian Constitution 1999 as amended, it says that the security and the welfare of the people shall be the primary purpose of government. And when you talk about the security, you talk about the physical security from the insurgency, terrorism, then you talk about economic security, you talk about cyber security. Then when you talk about welfare, you can use the lifespan of a human being to demonstrate that. Before a child is born, there is need for medical care, sacrosanct. When a child is born, medical care continues. The child needs to go to school, plan from school to be gainfully engaged. I recall, I'm approaching 60, and I recall that a time in this country, in the final year in the university, you had job offers attached with either a Volkswagen Beetle or Peugeot 504.
People call those the good old days.
Yeah, if we like to call it the good old days. So it was, in fact, you could go abroad, study, and come back to Nigeria because you have that sense of security. All right. Then we talk about, the same section 14 speaks about the motto of Nigeria: unity, faith, peace, and progress. So there are 4 doors that are there for a nation to prosper. You talk about the door of unity, and we have the key. So if the leader can open that, unite the people, like it's been done in Rwanda. Rwanda was in a serious crisis based on ethno-madness. Permit my expression of that. And they came to reality and said, no. So in Rwanda now, it's like a crime to attach yourself to any ethnicity. They are Rwandans. And it's a fast-growing African economy. So you talk about the faith that is produced by unity. The crude oil does not speak Ijaw language. It does not speak Bayelsa language. The gold in Zamfara does not speak Hausa language. God has blessed this country with about 40 mineral resources that have been discovered. There are many undiscovered. So can we be patriotic enough to know that these resources is for us to develop the whole nation? Donald Trump came from New York. I don't think he drove any special benefit to New York. Joe Biden is from Delaware or somewhere there. I don't think he has, so when we're united, we have faith in the project. When we are not united, we dismantle the projects. And it's a serious issue in Africa. And you now talk about peace. Amos chapter 3, verse 3 says, can 2 walk together except they be agreed? And that is why you have seen during these elections, whether we admit it or not, ethnicity played a serious role. Religion played a critical role, dividing the people, flexing muscle. The UAE, United Arab Emirates, they are, even Saudi Arabia now is opening up the space, even for other religions. Because there are several levels of wealth creation and wealth sustenance. So the first thing you do is create an enabling environment by engaging your local wealth. And you now attract foreign wealth into that environment. Singapore has done that, you see. Then when you talk about having peace within your borders, in public relations, there's what we call economic environment. What is the economic environment of Nigeria? Battered by kidnappers, so you can send an expatriate here to invest, and you are investing to make profit, and someday he's kidnapped somewhere, and they're asking for millions of dollars and things like that. So when we have that peace with one another, we can begin to talk about progress. And we can now sit down. I'm going to the National Assembly now. Section 4 of the Nigerian Constitution 1999 as amended says that the National Assembly shall make laws for the peace, order, and good governance of Nigeria. You see, very clear. We have 109 senators, 360 House of Reps members. So even when the executive is not moving in the direction of delivering on the promises of electoral promises, you can call it to order. Look at what happened in the UK. The parliamentarians started resigning when Boris Johnson appeared not to be flying the kite of service. And the man saw the handwriting on the wall and said, no, I must back down.
But do we see that in Nigeria?
You see, my advice really to politicians, he mentioned the case of politicians. Politics is not just about winning elective offices. No, it's beyond it. The United Nations came up with the Sustainable Development Goals, with 18 goals. 18 presidential candidates came out for this election that held yesterday. One of them a woman. Why can't this, even if it's 16 out of the 18 candidates, engage 16 out of the goals, of the Sustainable Development Goals, and mount pressure on the government? Rather than say we have to wait for another 4 years again. You take education, Section 18 of the Nigerian Constitution 1999 as amended, says that the government must provide education for all citizens. It's mandatory. If you read from Section 15 downwards, it even says the government should provide me maximum happiness. Manage the resources in a way that we have a self-reliant economy. Manage the economy in a way that wealth is not concentrated in the hands of few. Affordable housing, affordable food, care for the old, care for the disabled, care for all citizens. They are there in our constitution. You see, so you put pressure rather than competing to occupy office. And we are already setting a new agenda for the incoming leadership. You see, leadership is about adding value to the people. It's about service. Whether you like it or not, your time will round up. I did a study on Sheikh Zayed, the founding father of the modern UAE. This is a man who knew he was not going to live forever, but he succeeded in translating the UAE from a desert to an earthly paradise. You see, look at the last World Cup in Qatar. I asked myself a question: if it were to be an African country that stepped out to build the first air-conditioned stadium, though America is claiming they already built theirs earlier, what would have happened? By now, we are chasing money in the hands of, in the mouth of gorilla and things like that. And again, as part of certain agenda, our laws are, robust. Section 15, subsection 5 of the Nigerian Constitution 1999 as amended says that the state shall abolish, not may, shall abolish corrupt practices and abuse of office. These things are there. So, and that's why we have the three arms of government: the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. They are expected to work in synergy to drive a governance ecosystem that will enhance the fortunes of the citizens. What we are entitled to is prosperity, not poverty. You see, we have enough resources in Nigeria, for instance, to take care of the whole of West Africa. And I stand to be corrected on that. So how do you engage? It's not about having resources. It's about having resourceful engagement of your resources to create commonwealth for common good.
You have been talking about partnership between and among contenders in this process. And more often than not, you hear the eventual winners come out to extend the olive branch to those who lost. They tell you, victory for Nigeria and all of that. How come it doesn't translate to action? I mean, it doesn't go beyond mere speech to actionable plan. When we actually get to see it work, we see those people come together, meet, and agree on a way to actually move the nation forward. You want to say something about that?
It's a function of mindset, but I believe you can do justice.
All right,
yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, both it's a function of, like you said, the mindset and the sincerity of the purpose. And
so, like sincerity on the part of the speaker,
yeah, on the both of them. On the part of the both of them. Nigeria is not where you still see a number of politicians playing the politics on the basis of issues, interests, and also the collective bargaining or interest of the public. It is about the political party. So it's usually going to be extremely difficult, except where the person concerned or the politician concerned that comes to the ruling party, it is not likely to get appointment. And like he said, the critical service after every election or in every government is not with the occupiers of the office. It is actually in the opposition. Unfortunately, we don't have opposition in Nigeria. It's usually just about the 4-year routine of just contesting for election. And the moment after the election, possibly they go to the tribunal to challenge the result, because it is understood from the perspective of an average Nigerian politician that is incapable of making impact except and until he's in the office. And that is totally wrong. And like he said, you can form the shadow government like you have in the UK, such that every of the policies of government are interrogated and engaged extensively to be sure that it goes to the ultimate benefit of the people. And it is not just going to be about the interest of the politician and the usual criticism that is about criticizing what is there without offering an alternative. And criticism is not just condemning alone. It is about you providing an alternative to whatever it is that the government puts in place. And I think our politicians can evolve from the current process. And I was under, I can say to a large extent, under the, maybe illusion would be too much, but I think that would be more blunt to say that I was under the illusion that we were going to have an increased turnout of voters at this last election on Saturday. But from my assessment, from my experience on the field, and particularly this goes to the youth, I thought that with what I saw on the social media, with the 40% youth population of 18 to 34, I would see nothing less than about 50% of those 40% during the election. I saw less than 10% of them during the voting
the places
on Saturday.
Visited.
And I looked at it on the TV. I was particularly looking out for them in the TV. Those that, majority of them that were out, are the middle age that are more than 30 and above. The young people, the ones that still playing football, were still playing football. The ones that didn't bother going out, didn't go out. And I was expecting something to change, but in truth, the percentage, and you can look at the results that are also emerging, the percentage of the voters from the accredited, registered voters are still less than 30% in many of the places. The overall is not likely to be more than 30% when it is computed in the final result. So that tells me that the whole engagement in the social media, it is still really not translated to active political participation on ground. And that is where we need to start. I would pray and hope that the young people and those that are also actively involved on the social media would not stop the engagement with the outcome and the final result with the election. We'll see the need to constructively start engaging with the policies of government. And the level of consciousness and awareness, I can say that is one thing that we've achieved, that people are conscious, people are monitoring, people are engaging. It might be toxic, like I said, over the period, if we sustain it, it can become positive. And that is why I said the responsibility and the role of the politician is very crucial, especially those who are genuinely interested in the country, in the unity of the country, in the progress of the people. And like we said, like he said, the prosperity of the people and not the poverty situation that we're subjecting ourselves to. Unfortunately, what we've had is the politicians are almost here, just different by their political parties. They are almost united when it comes to some of the policies that does not benefit, the ordinary people. You could see how, though people were suffering during the cash crunch and the Naira redesign policy, you still find even politicians in the opposition supporting the current government on that policy direction. And that does not in any way reflect the sentiment of the people, the aspiration of the people, the cries of the people were not, no matter what, yes, it is part of the agenda, as it is said, to stamp out the vote buying and the money that must have been stashed away by some of the occupiers of public office. But some of those policies are not meant to be implemented in such a way that it becomes too detrimental for the survival of the average citizen in the country. And this is what was not really thought out. This was not really planned. This was not given sufficient time. And we're too used to this idea of what we've always known to be the fire brigade approach to many of the things. You just want to do it, bam, and you don't care what is the implication of that. And there was no kind of consultation with the people. There was no enough sensitization, which was part of the little challenges that I also saw that INEC would need to get its acts together in dealing with. There was the delimitation where voters were actually moved to different polling units. There wasn't sufficient information to people to understand where you have been moved to. I mean, how many people knows how to put whatever on the phone? So I know put it there on the phone, and then you'll get to know, well, how many people are able to use that? How many of them are sophisticated to use internet-enabled phones? And how many of I saw quite a number of them even asking me for directions that I don't even know. I mean, I can't blame them for that situation.
A lot of education and enlightenment that still needs to happen. Well, this is just the first phase of the election. There is a governorship and state assembly elections coming up. What do we do to improve the voter turnout this time, to see that those young men and women who are on the street playing football, all who have their PVCs, all come out to exercise their franchise 2 Saturdays from now?
If the government succeeds in gaining a bit of trust capital in managing this first phase of the elections, then we may have a better turnout, because for some, it's important. For some of those we went talking to, they will tell you point blank that they are persuaded their votes won't count. Some will even tell you they know the winners before. So you start educating them about beavers, transmission of elections, and that it's not only the results that will be transmitted, but even the accreditation and things like that. But how many of them will you talk to? You see, so. And for us, when you talk about practical governance, it's beyond the online engagement. It's what is on ground. How can we move forward as a people? How can we put pressure on those who are managing our resources?
But don't you think that social media is also playing a critical role in bringing people together?
It should, but it has not. That is just the truth. And in public relations, there's what we call bad advocacy, which is bad advocacy. I think we found pleasure in bad advocacy. In fact, I've been sending out messages to some platforms I belong to, appealing to them that please, politicians are all friends. I mean, like he said, some of them have gone around the parties, the major parties. If there's no way in PDP, you run to APC. If there's no way there, you run to Labour, you run to Zenith Labour and things like that. So I don't know why electorates should be quarreling. There's a time we had a matter and the other lawyer came to the office, we sat down, And he started quarreling with me, and I asked him point blank, is it your case? He said, no, neither is it my case. So we are just helping clients. So why are we quarreling? It's important because when we start doing that, then we are giving wings to the wrong approach. By the time politicians realize that you cannot set us against one another, that we are focused on the ideals of governance, then we know that there is accountability. And when you talk of good governance, accountability is a crucial point. And can we also blame them at the macro level? In public relations, you talk about issues, you talk about crisis. If you manage your issues well, you won't end up in crisis. That is proactive crisis management. When you find yourself in crisis, it's reactive crisis management, and it's costlier. Nigeria is currently in crisis. We've gone beyond issues. We have slipped into crisis. So when politicians come, already there is a template there. Insecurity, inflation. Those are not issues. They are crisis situations. And that even some of the things we are reading is making some Nigerians to ask the question, what are you even seeking the office for? When I read recently that today, that the total indebtedness of my country may be around 77 trillion naira. And I know it was about 12.12 trillion naira in March 2015. So what percentage is that? And we still have a national census coming up with billions of naira.
But if you consider, apologies please, if you consider the infrastructure that is being worked on across the country, which is believed to be the bedrock of development and progress in the country, do you think
I commend infrastructure. Well, you say, I came up with a doctrine. It's a two-edged sword doctrine. To make your infrastructure meaningful, you must invest in the superstructure. And the superstructure is the human element. So let me use a precedent. And we are speaking about the future here now. Things have happened. I commend the government for the completion of the railway system and things like that. But look at what happened between Abuja and Kaduna. Do you know how much we lost?
In the period.
I mean, that business shut down. So we are talking about sustainability. In public relations, when you talk about business, there are 5 pillars of business. You talk about growth, you talk about survival, you talk about profitability, you talk about employee satisfaction, you talk about social investment, otherwise known as corporate social responsibility. You see, and you have to carry everything along. You see, and the way to go is for government to make profit. And some countries, what they have done is to ensure that the stature of the public service does not outweigh the strength of the private sector in driving the economy, which means you make your policies friendly. And that's how you can create prosperity. So there are issues, great infrastructures, but when you build a 3-story building and somebody comes from somewhere to blow it up, what are we doing? So it's time to invest in the superstructure. I was watching a documentary of Sheikh Zayed when he was to turn 100 years. You know, I was transiting from Abu Dhabi to New York, so I had time to watch the documentary. The man said that he knew the oil money may not be there forever, and that wealth is not money, but investing in people. That's why when you go to the UAE, you see the impact of education on the citizens. He developed them. He prepared them for the global expectations. And that's what we're talking about. We should not be talking about children that are out of school, different kinds of, you know what I mean? So it's a critical issue. So we need to go back to that constitution. I quite agree. When you begin to talk about some things that are on the exclusive legislative list, like the management of some critical resources in the country, that we need to amend our constitution. But please, I'm appealing to all our wonderful audience this moment. Give me 20 minutes of your time study section 14 to section 18 of the Nigerian Constitution of 1999 as amended. Please, I'm sorry, don't study, just browse through, because study is deep. If it is implemented up to 70%, Nigeria will be the third richest country in the world. That's what we are saying. No constitution is perfect anyway. So we need people who are saints, who want to serve.
Did you say people who are saints?
Saints.
Okay,
saints to serve,
okay.
not to be served. And we keep on the advocacy until we get... Listen, Nigeria is one of the best countries in the world, sincerely speaking. You talk about the weather. Look at what is going on in Turkey. We have beautiful weather all around. Look at agriculture. Look at the potentials. So you need to invest in that superstructure. If we have invested in education, for instance, who will be selling votes? I mean, let's ask that question. How much will you pay me now to buy my PVC? I should come and vote for you by force. So poverty has become a tool. We need to deal with it. What can we do to revive the economy? The foreign direct investments we have reversed. They've gone back to their countries. They've abandoned our shores because there are other countries looking up to them. You see, so how do we reverse it? How do we have electricity in this country? I read a report that made me sad, that we have fled enough gas to probably provide electricity for a whole nation elsewhere. You see, so is it that we are a spoiled nation or what? My state, the Sunshine State, Ondo State, where you have the capital of the world, Okakoko. Ondo State, Edo, and that axis has about the second largest deposit of bitumen in the whole world. So when you talk of infrastructure, God has blessed this country. So we are talking to our leaders that please look out of the windows of the first class of your private jets and realize that there is a Nigeria because there are citizens there. So how can we develop this country? We never lose hope over this nation because the resources are there. Yeah. There are even some resources we have not discovered.
So does this translate to then charging the leaders to ensure that they put square pegs in square holes round?
We have even gone beyond square pegs. You can even put square pegs in round holes and turn it to square holes.
Yes.
According to
thinking outside the box.
In public relations. Okay. That's what we call conditioning. You see, what Lee Kuan Yew did was to put square peg in round hole. That my people, I may be tough, but I'm not here to pamper you. But we are going somewhere. And he achieved it. Between 1965, when Singapore left Malaysia as a coastal region with little resources, and now Singapore is one of the best places to live and to work in the world. As an HR practitioner, I was doing a research on Singapore. Singapore is already engaging the future of HR. AI, and the United Arab Emirates has a Ministry of Artificial Intelligence. So things are happening around the world, and the world is ready to partner with us.
Our minister said we are going to be producing pencil. Unfortunately, we didn't even produce it after 8 years of our science and tech ministry.
When children are already drawing with pieces,
you just spoke about policies and that some of the policies could be hard on the people, but the end result, once it's beneficial, then it will be acceptable. And it just brings back to my mind the issue of the Naira redesign policy and, the reasons given for it. And then in the report, the review now given by the CBN governor, it's like there was some level of progress. So why is it receiving such backlash from the citizenry?
It's inevitable. I mean, there's the process of such a decision that is usually missing because of the arrogance of many of our public office holders. Once they become the chief executive or they become the leader of either the country or the states, they actually assume that they have the monopoly of the knowledge and that they speak for the people. So once they say it, it should be it. And that is the irony of it. Forgetting the simple logic of human existence that you will have to resist change. especially when you're moving from the position of comfort. It is very natural for a human to resist any form of change when they come. But what usually allows for some of this, and that was why you understand what he said with the issue of Lee Kuan Yew and Singapore. It's about the process of allowing the people to understand that we're going on a journey. It is extremely difficult, even for a child, your normal child, without you telling the child we're going on a journey, we're having a travel. You just drag the child and say, follow me. It's going to say, mommy to where? Or daddy, where are we going? And you will see the resistance immediately, especially when he has his toy that he's playing with. You want him, there might be danger that you'll see coming up. But without telling it to that child to say, oh, leave your toy now. This place is about to collapse, so let's get out of here as fast as possible. Even when you say that to the child, it's likely to say, wait, let me pick my toy. But you know there's no that time. But that is exactly what you have with many of the policies. The policies sometimes are not well thought out. Even when they are sufficiently interrogated and they're well spelled out, there's the roadmap to how it is going. If I would ask you, with this Naira policy redesign thing, do you have an idea of how much was actually pushed out and to who by the CBN? Such information are not available. When you say a bank is hoarding, you don't get the names of the banks. You just say, oh, it's particular bank is just being caught with hoarding of the Naira or failing to load it in the ATM. And then it is assumed that the moment CBN announces it, all the banks will fall in line. We have a peculiar country, and I'm not in any way in doubt about that. I am not ashamed to say it. We are a peculiar people. We operate peculiar circumstances. The moment that policy, and that was what you saw happening with the filling stations. The filling stations that under normal circumstances operated POS for your payments, the moment they had the Naira the design, they converted that to another business, employed some of their family members and friends to start holding the POS on the side. So now POS is not allowed for you again. You would have to go and use 15,000 Naira to collect 13,000 Naira from that new operator of the POS. And you're not getting cash, mind you. You would get that slip that you now take to the filling station. So everybody seems to exploit the situation. And this is what we talk about when our policymakers and implementers don't have the thorough period of even testing, like the mock election that INEC conducted. Those are the kind of things that you expected for people to actually engage with when you're dealing with a population of about over 200 million people. You don't just assume that everybody is going to be like genuine in their intention. You have saints that are conscious of what they're going to get with their gods to the extent that they don't want to exploit one another. But it opens up a new vista of opportunism for quite a number of them. But the implementers are always leaving the ordinary citizens to the whims and caprices of those who will also carry out some of the policies. And that was what you saw with the bank official who started hoarding, trading in the money, because even when you don't have it in the hands of the ordinary citizens, you saw it with some of the socialites who were spraying the new notes in the parties. You saw it with some of the politicians who have the opportunity of getting it. So the resistance would naturally come because people were not part of that process or that change of that policy. This was something that should have actually had the opportunity of people expressing their opinion and understanding of the issues. And that goes a very long way when we want to talk about laws that are implemented. Unfortunately, go to many of the houses of assembly. You don't even know when laws are either drafted. Public hearings are not conducted. The ones that are conducted, announcements are made on the day of the public hearing. So people don't even have the opportunity of making contributions to the policy process.
Well, maybe not in all of the cases.
I said in most cases. That, in fact, the ones that I said that publicizes on the day of the public hearing are the few that make those publications. Others don't make any publications. Some don't even conduct public hearing. And we've seen House of Assembly passing laws within 3 days in this country. And you want to ask yourself, do you actually follow the process of enactment of laws in the process that are culminated in those laws? And they're signed by the government. So the citizens are already just conditioned, just like it is deliberately done with the pauperization and the democratization of poverty among the ordinary citizens, which has been used as a tool for manipulation and also leading of the people, because that is only when they wait for them to be so hungry and starved to have to look for 10,000 naira when it comes to the election period, or even have the sachet of gari and rice and whatever distributed for people as form of inducement for them to vote. So the people have already been conditioned as just a set of people who are meant to be just consumer of whatever is decided by those that are meant to serve them, but now citizens are the ones serving the elected officers, the ones that would call themselves the chief servants or master servants are actually using sloganeering to deceive people, because they really, in deep sense, don't serve the people. It's just the people serving the public offices.
Well, we'll take the conversation further, but that will be after this break. So please stay with us. We'll be back in just a moment to